Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. Today is the 2nd of November 2021. These are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with Pakistan that has assured the international community that it vigorously supports an inclusive political settlement in Afghanistan. Now, there is a whole article in the US media by a former Afghan diplomat, and he points the fingers at Pakistan. Not the first time that the Afghans have been pointing fingers at Pakistan, but the reply, the rebuttal also came a very strong one from the Pakistani side. And it was also said by the Pakistani side that Washington also needs to stop laying the blame for every problem in Afghanistan on Pakistan's doorstep. This is going to be our leading segment of the day. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be on the COP26. The first day has gone by, the second day is in progress, and of course a lot of pledges were made, including the pledge to end deforestation by the year 2030. Nevertheless, there have been a lot of leaders that have raised their apprehensions about the future of climate change in the world. The UN chief also, Antonio Guterres, said that the world faces a climate catastrophe, whereas the US President Joe Biden also apologized to his fellow world leaders about the withdrawal of the United States under the previous US regime. This is going to be our second segment. On the third segment, we'll be talking about Lahore. We had earlier said that Lahore had been declared as the second most polluted city of the world because of the air pollution levels, but now on Monday it has been declared as the most polluted city in the world, leaving its traditional rival New Delhi far behind. The official air quality index has been reported at 289, and the international monitoring bodies has put the score at 397. A lot to ponder about as far as Lahore is concerned. Hope the people are keeping themselves safe. And the final story, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be Pakistan that has highlighted its success story about the safety and the security standards in the field of radioactive waste management. Pakistan organized an event on the sidelines of the International Conference on Radioactive Waste Management, which opened at the headquarters of the International Atomic Energy Agency, otherwise known as the IAEA, in Vienna. And this is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns the Afghan situation and the blame game that has been coming from the Afghan side rather, towards Pakistan as to Pakistan's involvement in activities which have been detrimental to Afghanistan. And the latest that has come has been from a former Afghan ambassador to the United Nations, Javed Ahmed, who has again, as usual, pointed the fingers at Pakistan and has said that Islam shouldn't be blamed. And he said the Biden administration should reassess its fundamental relationship with Pakistan in the wake of all the allegations that he has put forward. This came in a leading US media outlet. We will come with more details, but after this report.
The months following fall of Kabul to Taliban have been rife with introspection and possible implications of Taliban rule for regional and global security. Amid the murky blame game which ensued following Taliban's lightning advance to Kabul, few stakeholders upheld far-sighted diplomatic pragmatism regarding volatile situation of war-ravaged country. Pakistan, as a responsible regional actor, vociferously advocated for constructed engagement with interim Afghan government to usher peace and stability and avert prospects of humanitarian catastrophe in the country. Reiterating its pragmatic stance regarding Afghanistan, Pakistan has assured the international community that it ardently supports an inclusive political settlement in Afghanistan. Debunking the old political tactic of maligning Pakistan for their own strategic blunders, Pakistani embassy in Washington emphasized that now was the time to stop laying the blame for every problem in Afghanistan on Pakistan's doorstep. It's pertinent to mention here that 22 US senators moved a bill in the Senate seeking to assess Pakistan's alleged role in Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul and in recent Taliban offensive in Panjshir Valley. Moreover, in malign attempt to frame Pakistan in a negative facet, a former Afghan ambassador to the United Nations, Javed Ahmed, wrote a misleading op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this week. While concocting baseless fabrications against Pakistan, Mr. Ahmed alleged that Pakistan succeeded in enabling the Taliban takeover and suggested Biden administration to reassess its fundamental sentimental relationship with Pakistan. This is not the first instance when Afghan officials blamed Pakistan for their own shortcomings, as successive Afghan regimes persistently made outlandish claims about Pakistan's role in Afghanistan without providing any evidence.
Now, to talk more about this, we've been joined by Dr. Shabana Fayyaz. She's an expert on international affairs. Dr. Saiba, thank you very much to have joined us. Ma'am, how do you view this latest allegation that has come from a former Afghan ambassador to the United Nations, Javed Ahmed? And he again points the fingers at Islamabad. Not the first time that somebody from Afghanistan has pointed the fingers at Pakistan. Why is that blame game coming again from the Afghan side, looking at all the efforts that Pakistan has been doing and is still doing as far as Afghanistan is concerned?
Very pertinent question. The former ambassador to the United Nations has again, I think, added to the mistrust that was very much reflected in the earlier regime in Afghanistan, recognized by the Pakistan and international community. It is very, very strange if you look, and I think what they are trying to do is to come on the track with the other international actors who are trying to defame Pakistan's effort in Afghanistan. And so it should not be viewed as an act in isolation. It has its threads connected to some of the strongest lobbyists in around the world that are not comfortable with the coming of Taliban, and they blame everything of even the coming of Taliban on Pakistan. So this is a very, very short-sighted view.
All right. Now, Dr. Saiba, in all of this comes a rebuttal from the Pakistan embassy in the United States, and it's a very strong rebuttal at that. And it puts the things across, the facts and figures across as far as Pakistan's efforts are concerned. It also points the fingers at a lot of mistrust between the Ashraf Ghani government and the US that led, in fact, to the current situation when Ashraf Ghani fled Afghanistan. Why can't the previous Afghan regime accept its failure?
I think it's easier said than done. The Afghan regime who has run away, fled from Afghanistan, and especially the Ashraf Ghani close associates and himself, they are especially, they just want to give an image of the victimhood to the world. This is number one. Number two is that they want to corner, I will must say, Pakistan, and they want to put it's just like the one who loses, the game, and they say that I lost because the other side made me lost. They don't realize that what they have been doing in the past have contributed to their very, the failure in Afghanistan. And at the end of the day, what has happened is that the people of Afghanistan are suffering. And I think whether those in government or outside the governments within the Afghani leadership should take a clear and a trusted view of the situation on ground.
Dr. Saiba, what should Pakistan do now? I mean, we've had the statement taken out by the Pakistan embassy in the US. What more needs to be done now by Pakistan? Because we see that there is a continuous effort, as you said yourself in the beginning of this segment, by certain lobbyists, by certain segments that are not comfortable with the current Afghan Taliban government in Afghanistan.
I think there is no complete recipe what Pakistan can do, and Pakistan is doing a very good effort from the very beginning. But the fact is that at times it matures into something positive, at times it backfires. Having said this, the reactionary Pakistan should not be reactionary. We have written a rebuttal; it's more than enough. We should not be in the spiral of proving that we are right and you are wrong. We should construct. We should focus on having a constructive dialogue with those who are in control in Kabul, and make international community understand the humanitarian losses, the humanitarian cost of the economic losses or the war conflict has happened in Afghanistan. And also what Pakistan needs to do is to give an image, or rather in reality what we are doing is that we have always been a constructive partner of peace in Afghanistan. That should be the focus of our foreign policy or the Afghan policy. We should not be distracted by what they are saying.
All right, Dr. Saiba, also let's come to Pakistan's efforts as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Whether it be pledging for aid for Afghanistan, whether it be coming from our Prime Minister or our Foreign Minister, or working towards the benefit of Afghanistan. We've had our Foreign Minister talk about it, ask for humanitarian assistance worth rupees 5 billion. This was stated that Pakistan is going to, in fact, give that assistance to Afghanistan in the mid of last month, around the 20th of October. After visiting Kabul, this was a statement that our Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab had given. Around the 27th also, there was a ministerial meeting of the neighboring countries of Afghanistan in Tehran, where Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab also asked for devising a long-term roadmap for Afghanistan. Now, how important do you feel, despite, let's put, if we put the criticism or the negativity aside as far as blaming Pakistan or the Afghan Taliban government is concerned, what needs to be done now as far as a future roadmap for Afghanistan is concerned?
I think for international community, they need to be sensitized of the cost of the 2 decades of civil war or sort of instability in Afghanistan, or what the other powers have done to the people of Afghanistan, number one. Number two, the Pakistan and all the neighbors of Afghanistan need to have a very, very constructive role. Here, I must say that the China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, and other countries are very much sensitized. Pakistan has been playing a very proactive role, and that is well received by all countries across. And thirdly, I think foremost is the humanitarian assistance. Though our government is not at a page of recognizing, or at the moment, the Taliban as officially, diplomatically. So, but the fact is the humanitarian assistance should continue. I must tell you, I am aware of the civil society organizations who have been formed by the philanthropists in Pakistan, who are collecting the aid either in the form of food or the other medicines or even the warm clothing, and they have been sending very successfully the through cargo and through trucks going into the Afghanistan. So this is the people of Afghanistan. I must say, Afghanistan are not something to be left in lurch. They have to be taken care of, and Pakistanis are very well aware of that. And I think we have always been forthcoming to help out Afghanistan, and we should do it irrespective of who controls, the Kabul. Why? Because we have geographical, ethnic, religious, and cross-cultural relations with Afghanis, and we should not leave them alone.
All right. Now, in all of this also came the pledges for aid from the United Nations, from the different other countries. Even the United States pledged some aid for Afghanistan. But there is an issue of receiving that aid through the different NGOs. That could take some time. And in the meantime, winter is upon us. We are already in the beginning of the month of November. And if in Pakistan it's getting cold, in Afghanistan it must be, in fact, even colder. So what needs to be done now? How important is it for the world bodies also to kind of expedite that aid to Afghanistan? I'm not talking of Pakistan, because Pakistan is doing that.
You rightly pointed out, whenever you are distributing any humanitarian assistance or any, even in case of disasters, you have to have a certain supply chain, you have to have a certain receiving and delivering chain as well. And this is what the disaster management or the crisis management authority's role is. If you look at the role of UNHCR that have been dealing with Afghan refugees, that have been an incredible story, not only in our case, Afghanis, but also across the world. For this particular purpose, I really feel the United Nations has to come up with and they are doing it through different organizations, but they have to revitalize the organs and connect these organs with the different nodes in Afghanistan. And I feel, as I read the Taliban stories, that they are very willing to be a partners of distribution in humanitarian assistance across Afghanistan, irrespective of the ethnic identity, irrespective of the religions. So that is a positive point, but who will ensure that? That is what
But that is a big question.
Yes, that is a big question, and actually that is a big challenge as well.
All right. But speaking of such challenges, I mean, shouldn't, these challenges be overcome with looking at the current state of affairs as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and the way the people are undergoing a humanitarian and economic crisis? Shouldn't, other things be put aside as far as political political acceptance or not is concerned, and humanitarian aid needs to be expedited needs to be put forward through whichever mechanism is possible, maybe through Pakistan, through the NGOs in Pakistan. But shouldn't this be done? Wasn't Pakistan there for all the foreigners when they left Afghanistan, and we facilitated them? We brought them here and we sent them. Can't the foreigners, those of those countries, also send that aid to Pakistan, and Pakistan can in its turn send that aid to Afghanistan?
This is asking too much from Pakistan's side and also from the international community side. Your points are very, very valid, I must say, but they are a bit idealistic as well. If you read the international politics story, the all humanitarian, political, diplomatic, military, strategic, everything is tied up to one another. Obviously, the people feel around the world, they are irrespective of the religion, feel very strongly about what is happening to Kashmiris, to Afghanis, or in Lebanon or elsewhere. But the fact is, do that sentiment prevails in the actions in international community? No, it does not. And secondly, very important point, Umar Saab, that you have raised is that Pakistan becomes a transit zone of distributing the aid into Afghanistan. I think that will be very dangerous for Pakistan because, the factions within Afghanistan, look at the record, what is happening with the Ashraf Ghani's government. We are witness, and myself have been part of so many seminars and webinars where all of their diplomatic people were invited and given the forums and facilitated. If they are thinking so shallow, what do you think the other factions who are at losing end now or are not in control, what they will think of Pakistan? So I think Pakistan has to but has to have its role very constructively and in a manner that does not hurt Pakistan image and does not go negative to our national interest as well.
Now, Dr. Sabah, you talked about the shallow opinion that certain sectors have. Would you like to kind of elaborate on that?
Shallow opinion, I must say, is that they have been leaders. I don't want to blame anybody, but sort of opportunist mindset do prevails in certain circles, policy circles in Afghanistan in the recent past, and also other countries. But this is not only to the Afghanistan; it also relates to the other war-torn countries, because those who want come into power, they want to maximize their power and use the other neighbors to their benefit. And so this has happened, and Ashraf Ghani's government had a lot of MOUs signed with Pakistan, and Pakistan continues to offer educational assistance, scholarships, medical aids, road infrastructures, and many other parts, and transit trade as well. But why it really upsets one that why at certain point they are defaming their relationship with Pakistan. Of course, there can be differences between the neighbors, but the putting all the blame on one side is really makes me think that's what I call a shallow analysis.
All right, but of course this claim comes from a former ambassador to the of Afghanistan to the United Nations, so it seems that he is from the regime of Ashraf Ghani. What do you feel of the relationship between the current regime of the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan? Do you feel that the relationship is moving smoothly? Do you feel that they appreciate all the aid, all the help that Pakistan is giving, the cooperation that Pakistan is giving them?
Well, it is, I think Pakistan's relationship with the current sort of setup in Afghanistan is moving in a constructive way. Number one, from Pakistan's point of view, we don't want Afghanistan soil to be used against Pakistan or its security interests. This is an assurance the Taliban have given to us and to the other neighbors as well, number one. Number two is regarded the trade and other facilities. There have been issues of opening the gates, even from the Taliban earlier, batches, but now they have agreed and the transit trade has opened up. Similarly applies to the distribution of humanitarian aid. They are facilitating, they are happy about the humanitarian assistance. This is what I can say, but I think Pakistan's stand is very clear. We don't want to be a basket ourselves to only one part of faction in Afghanistan, no matter what US says or whatever other country says. We want stability in Afghanistan. And Pakistan have been stressing the policy circle, as far as I know from the published account, have been stressing for the inclusive government in Afghanistan.
And that's a very important point. I'd like to stop you there. The inclusive political settlement, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, how how should say, how optimistic is Pakistan of Afghan Taliban's government's inclination towards inclusiveness?
This is $1 million question, really. So far, they have, what I read from the newspaper account, is the two sort of the important stalwarts or portfolios were given to the other factions in their more than 25 people cabinet. Uh, so it really remains to be seen how they are going to up is. But I think it is too soon to expect that they will deliver what international community really wants them to deliver. What is important is that international community, including ourselves, we need to understand that Afghanistan is coming out from a very, very difficult scenario of 2 decades. The nation is on the mend. And so the most important is to give them some breathing space and let them, institute the policies on ground that they are already doing. And then with passage of time, obviously, uh, there should be a sort of recognition issue being in question.
All right. Dr. Saiba, I'd like to also point out what Javed Ahmed, of course, he is a former ambassador. Nevertheless, I'd like to say something that he said, quote unquote. He asked the Biden administration to reassess its fundamental relationship with Pakistan and deploy an intelligence-led team to engage the Taliban directly. Hasn't the US already engaged the Taliban directly in the past? Wasn't the deal that Pakistan facilitated between the Afghan Taliban and the Afghan government, and it was the US that was also part of that deal?
Afghanis, the Ashraf Ghani faction or the last previous government, you can say, is more of a statement making. It really depends who is receiving this Biden statement. Do you think the Biden American president will listen to their statements? Really, I really don't think so. This is just one of the chip, overall. And what they have their own calculations. They want what Pakistan is seeing is same they are doing. They want inclusive government. They want Pakistan to be assured that their Afghanistan should not be used as a soil for terrorism, either against Pakistan or against USA or otherwise. So Pakistan-US relationship is not dependent on what former Afghan people are going to say about it. Pakistan has very sort of different relationship with US. So this is a very, very short-sighted view that he has given.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabana Fayyaz Saiba, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the statement by this former Afghan ambassador to the United Nations, of course, again, putting the blame on Pakistan and asking the United States to directly engage the Taliban, which it has been doing in the past as well. And of course, to put the blame on Pakistan is nothing new as far as the previous Afghan regimes are concerned. Let's hope better sense prevails. Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, that concerns the COP26. The world leaders have promised today to, of course, end deforestation by 2030. More than 100 world leaders have promised to end and reverse the deforestation in around 10 years' time, less than 10 years' time. We are about at the end of 2021. And this was the first major deal of the COP26 Climate Summit. A lot of other things also happened as far as this summit is concerned. One of the important things was the US President Joe Biden apologizing on behalf of the former US regime, that of Donald Trump, for having come out of the climate change agreement. And of course, he apologized on behalf of the US to all the other partners as far as the climate change is concerned. Also, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said and warned the leaders that the world faces a climate catastrophe. The world, of course, is facing a climate catastrophe because of the fact that the temperatures are increasing at a certain pace, which should not. They should be at 1.5 degrees or even less, but in fact they are increasing at a much more higher level, and that is what concerns the United Nations chief. And this is just one of the concerns that was highlighted during the COP26 summit, and it is a summit that is going on. Dr. Vaqar Zakaria, who is the managing director of Hagler Bailey Pakistan, also director Himalayan Wildlife Foundation, joins us online. Thank you very much, Vaqar Sahab, to have joined us. Vaqar Sahab, how do you see COP26? How do you foresee the different pledges that have been made during COP26 so far, and the involvement of the different countries?
But this COP26 comes in at a very interesting time where I think this is for the first time the risks for climate change are recognized as real, and the debate on whether these risks are there or whether climate change will happen or not is gone and buried in history. And if you look at the expectations that we have, it was very interesting. I attended the COP3 in 1997 when we felt that this is it and we are going to solve the problem. And it has been 24 years since, and we are still struggling. So from what we have seen so far, the glass is never completely full, but some very serious commitments have been made relating to when the countries will go into net zero emissions, and very, very important, the reversal of deforestation that will take place. These are two major developments. But there is still skepticism that promises have been made in the past, promises are not kept.
Promises have never been put to task, and they have never been completed in time. So, Zakaria Saab, do you feel that the pledges that have been made, the two important pledges that you talk about, that is, of course, to end deforestation, and the second, to come to zero carbon emission, do you feel these are pledges and the time period that has been put forward, do you feel that these are attainable if and only if the countries really move forward in that direction?
Well, these are certainly attainable, and what we've been talking about in the past COPs was all attainable. But what really happens when it comes down to doing things, then it requires investments, it requires commitments, and then the political situations in different countries come into play. However,
is it also a question of political will, Zakaria Saab, of the different countries? Because, anybody, me or you, can make a pledge during a meeting, but then we can just, do whatever we want on the sidelines. But do you feel there is a political will this time, because the danger is ever so real?
Well, two things. Once, clearly, as you've said, the danger is very real. This past year, we've seen fires, we've seen floods that we've seen never before. And if you look at Pakistan, we have some major floods. And this year in October, the weather was completely unusual with a lot of rain happening, the extreme weather events. But another thing that is very, very encouraging that I see is the younger generation now is saying we've had enough and you cannot compromise our future. And Greta Thunberg has been leading that movement. And our younger people in Pakistan, I see on Twitter and social media, they're beginning to take it very, very seriously. And that is what I think is going to make the difference or bring about the change. And I'm very hopeful when the leadership passes on to these younger hands who seriously believe that their future is being compromised by us in the older generation. I think that is where the real hope lies. And in our government also, there is attention given to the youth, what they say. The Prime Minister himself is still very energized and motivated, and it is a style of connecting to people. I'm hopeful on that account that here, as well as in the rest of the world, these movements will really force the politicians to make the hard choices
in real time. But Zakaria Saab, you talked about Greta Thunberg. I'd like to point out that she has been extremely critical about COP26 and the previous COPs as well, and she has more or less rubbished the pledges that have been made. She said they haven't taken place and they will not take place. Do you feel that maybe the United Nations or the COP26 needs to include more youth leaders like her so that their point of view could also be heard?
I don't think the world leaders have a choice but not to hear. The writing is on the wall. If they don't hear, the younger generation is going to take up the leadership. And the blah, blah, blah that you said, if you look at Pakistan, there is less of blah, 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 and
There's a
maybe
lot of
very
work.
little.
We'll come to Pakistan, but I wanted to talk about Greta Thunberg and the youth across the world. Zakaria Saab, do you feel that whatever they have said, and of course a lot of them have really criticized the world leaders as far as their pledges or their action taken to alleviate the effects of climate change is concerned, do you feel their voices are being heard, or is just also being sidelined as other things are?
I think their voices are beginning to get heard, and what we see, even the older generation draws inspiration from them and puts pressure on the politicians. So, as we used to say, the empty pledges don't go unnoticed now. Yes, their voices are being heard, and they're becoming louder and louder, and they're becoming more and more impatient, and the pressure is not going down. And I think we can see across the board that in this COP also, there is the questions are already being asked. Are these just empty words, or are these serious pledges? We'd like to see the commitments, the investments, the monies that have to be put into the developing countries like ours for resilience and adaptation. So the accounting, I think, is becoming more simpler and serious in all this.
Let's
And
hope
as
so.
I said,
Let's hope so, Zakaria Saab. But there's one more thing that I'd like to ask your point of view. Let's come to a little bit before we come to some of the important highlights of day one. I'd like to ask about Pakistan's role as far as alleviating the effects of climate change are concerned. I think a lot of countries around the world, even the so-called developed countries, can take a hint from all the work that Pakistan is doing.
well, we have limited resources, and then again, there is economic development, and the North-South debate typically says that you use the cheaper natural resources, coal, oil, and gas, and develop, and when it comes to us, there's pressure on us to do more, as we say. Setting that aside, if you look at what we're doing, the commitments that we've made, and actually what we are delivering, the 10 billion tree tsunami project and the Clean Green Pakistan movement, the national electric vehicles policy, and what we've said in the nationally determined contributions. But let's look at what we've already done. The billion tree tsunami project is real. You can go around and you can see for itself. Saying that we are there, we've done it all, would not be right. It
No,
takes
but
a
at
long
least we
time.
are in the right direction, and that could not be the case for a lot of other countries that I could name, in fact.
Absolutely. If you look at the equatorial rainforests, they're still being converted for economic uses. That is going on at an alarming rate. But even with a lot of pressure and expensive fuels that we have, we are still working on storing carbon in the forests. And there's a very, and these monies are largely coming out of our own pockets. We're not depending on dole-outs from anyone for these. So we are clearly saying we're doing what we can. We're putting our money from very little that we have. We're taking money away from development and putting it into climate adaptation. The world, please help us to do more. And I think it's a very balanced statement that Pakistan has made, that we've said that we are targeting 50% reduction in emissions by 2030, for example. We're not saying we can do 100%, but we are saying that we will do so much from our own resources, and 35% has to come from international finance, and we're making it conditional. And I think that is a very clear statement. We're committing, we're doing already something, we're putting in money. Please help us to do more. And the commitments that we have made, I think, are backed up by solid analysis and calculations on what we can realistically do.
That is so true. but at least we can hold our heads high on all the efforts that Pakistan and the Pakistani government has been putting through. The number of times that our Prime Minister has also highlighted climate change on the important fora, including that of the United Nations General Assembly. Now let's come to day one of COP26 and the important points that we can kind of take out. First of all is the apology by Joe Biden as far as Donald Trump's government's coming out of the previous Paris Agreement was concerned, and now of course the US is back with full vigor. Do you feel that the return of the US will bring a positive change or will have a domino effect on other countries?
The US is a very complex situation where you never know which way in the next election, what turn it will take. However, the investments that the Joe Biden government is making into development of technologies that can help us from protection from climate change are real. And this is a huge departure from a very aggressive and adamant posture taken by the previous US government compared to now, where you're getting an apology and at least an admission. However, expecting that the US will make major changes overnight, I think would be asking for too much. Their economy is geared to very heavy energy use. They're locked into cheaper oil and coal, and shifting that economy to a renewable-based economy is going to take time. And how quickly these shifts happen, I think, again, we go back to what kind of pressures will remain. I think the moral pressure that is being now applied on the US by more responsible countries is coming into play, and that includes the younger generation as well. So the message that is going on out from the developing countries now, we're vulnerable, we're trying to do very little within our means, it really puts pressure on countries like US, who are major polluters. Look at China. China, with comparatively lesser per capita emissions, has made commitments which are far more significant given their state of development of economy. So these countries, China and Pakistan included, are putting pressure, moral and otherwise, on the US. And I think that pressure will come to show the results.
All right, let's hope so, because Boris Johnson says, and I quote, the doomsday device is real and the clock is ticking to the furious rhythm of hundreds of billions of turbines and systems covering the earth in a suffocating blanket of carbon dioxide. A lot of disappointment also on day one of the COP26, Zakaria Saab. Delegates from other nations such as the Prime Minister of Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown, or Panama's President Laurentino Cortizo, all have shown signs of disappointment or pessimism. Why is that so?
Well, they truly are going on what they have seen in the past, and those that are vulnerable cannot live on hope alone. And they're the ones that are, their economies and their lives really at risk. So we cannot really blame them for taking the position they are taking. How much their voices are heard, we're beginning to see that they are being taken seriously compared to before. But their skepticism is clearly understandable. They're helpless. They cannot do any control. They cannot reduce their emissions over and above what they're already doing. And some of them are losing land and sinking. Very well founded, and I think in Pakistan and India as well also, our position has always been, we have done nothing wrong, why we are being punished for faults of others. However, I think the kind of investment commitments that are now being made and the accountability that is being set in now, I think there will be deliveries in the next, say, 4 or 5 years. We should not expect miracles to happen overnight, but I think some serious investments into reductions as well as adaptations will happen. And I think adaptation is what these vulnerable countries are going to look for. Adaptation has to be done immediately. Bangladesh needs flood embankments. to protect themselves, their properties. And Maldives is in serious trouble on that account. They need to raise their whole properties. That will need money. And that actually can be done fairly quickly in the short run. They don't have to wait 20, 30 years for the climate to reverse. So the
Of course.
protections can be built in now. So I think we are hopeful now that the money is going to go into protection and adaptation very soon.
Let's hope so, Waqar Zakaria Saab, that all of the efforts go in the right direction and pretty quickly and exponentially, and that all the countries come together as one in order to fight this menace that is climate change. Because not only other factors, but also there is the pandemic, that is the COVID-19, that is affecting the negotiations of COVID-19 and the further progress as far as the alleviating the effects of climate change are considered because of course it is a pandemic and people are getting affected by it. Thank you very much, Waqar Zakaria Saab, MD Hagler Bailey, Pakistan, and Director Himalayan Wildlife Foundation, to have joined us and to have talked to us about COP26 day one, and of course the important pledges that have been made, whether it be deforestation or carbon free emissions. Let's hope that that comes to reality and fruition earlier than stated. Let's come to our last two stories very quickly. The first concerns Lahore. It was stated a day or two back, and we said it in our show, that Lahore had been declared the second most polluted city in the world because of its level of air pollution. Now what has happened is that on Monday it has been revealed that Lahore has become, as far as the air pollution goes, the most polluted city in the world, and that raises a lot of issues and questions, especially when it comes to diseases that are related to your breathlessness, that are related to asthma. Those who are asthmatic need to be extremely careful. Those who are have had COVID-19 or are immunocompromised need to really stay inside their homes and keep themselves well aerated. They need to be outside as less as possible, especially when there's a lot of smog or less visibility. Also, when it comes to driving, people need to be extremely vigilant in times when there is less visibility, and you can see in the images in our parallel screen as to how the image visibility affects of course the vehicle transportation in different areas, especially in Lahore, which is now has been declared as the most polluted city because the AQI index has been reported at 289 and international monitoring bodies have put the score at 397. Be very vigilant, Lahore. We are with you. And our last story, ladies and gentlemen, comes from all the way from the Embassy of Pakistan in Vienna, where it says that Pakistan has highlighted its success story about safety and security standards in the field of radioactive waste management. Pakistan will organize an event on the sidelines of the International Conference on Radioactive Waste Management, which opened in the headquarters of the International Atomic Energy Agency, otherwise known as the IAEA. Now, Pakistan's permanent representative at the United Organization is the Vienna Ambassador Aftab Ahmed Khokar. He made his opening remarks at the event. He talked about the safety and secure management of the radioactive waste. That was of fundamental importance. Then, of course, Mr. Mohammad Naeem, Chairman Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission, PAEC, who is also co-chairing this IAEA conference, said that Pakistan had more than 50 years of experience in following integrated radioactive waste management system and was making steady progress in that. He also talked about Pakistan's radioactive waste management infrastructure, which will be of crucial importance to Pakistan's future plans for sustainable nuclear national programs. The event was attended, of course, by scientific experts, the officials from the IAEA, as well as international delegates. And of course, the conference was extremely important to understand Pakistan's perspective and point of view and the efforts that Pakistan has been making in this regard. And it's very important for Pakistan to highlight all those efforts that have been made by it in different spheres, and this was just one of those efforts. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow, same time, same place, new stories or a revision of stories and updation of what has been happening in Pakistan across the world. Stay tuned, stay vigilant, get yourselves vaccinated and follow the protocols. Allah Hafiz.